many biohacks which are not expensive, that don't require high technology, and that can actually be integrated into our day-to-day lives.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi, where we're speaking with high achievers, change makers, and thought leaders about their journeys, what's going on behind the scenes, and much else besides. I'm excited today to have Dr. Marcus Ranney joining us on this podcast. He's a founder and chief executive officer of Human Edge. He is a longevity physician and he's the author of the book, The Human Edge, as well. Dr. Rani, thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Amrita.
So, let me start by asking you a little bit about what it means to be a longevity physician. This is very much a buzzword, much like biohacking, but our audiences are a little bit different. So, I'm going to ask you to tell us about your own journey and what it actually means.
Yeah, so I mean, it comes from a space of the doctor should help you feel better and be healthier. When I first started the practice, and people would ask, I would say, my job is to try and help you live healthier for longer. I remember my mum asking me and saying, Marcus, isn't that what all doctors are meant to do? And then you try to go down the rabbit hole of, well, actually, there are a lot of misalignments in terms of incentives. And more broadly, we've constructed over the last 100 years a healthcare system which is much more sick care focused. Obviously, on the advent on the back of the Great World Wars, and it being much more focused on disease pathogenesis and that management. So that's not my mental model. Amrita, prior to medicine, the first part of my career was actually in the armed services. So as a volunteer reserve in the Royal Air Force. And at the time, I was studying my first degree program at University College in London, which was around physiology and extreme physiology. And physiology in these incredible extreme environments, which I got to spend a lot of time into. So for me, the mental model of the human frame, both body and brain, was always about achieving incredible feats, summiting Everest, putting a man or woman in space, fighter pilots, astronauts, Olympians, all of that type of stuff. And then I get into the wards. My first job is intensive care. My second job is urology. My third job is geriatrics. And I'm faced with this stark paradox of extreme and frailty, of optimization and sort of sick care. And that didn't fit well in my brain. So I decided I want to do something about that. And so that's been the journey of sort of Human Edge. And so longevity is helping you live healthier for longer, which is not just the x-axis of lifespan, number of years, but it's actually the quality of those years which matter more.
That makes a lot of sense. And it does feel like something that people are paying more attention to nowadays. You're based in India. I know you're very much a global citizen, born and brought up in the UK. You also worked with NASA at one point. So we want to come back to the astronauts and folks you've worked with. In India, though, if I were to ask you, you've worked with Olympians, cricketers, corporate leaders. Can you tell us a little bit about the commonalities of your clientele? And also, does it tend to be folks in their 40s who are looking at longevity or even younger?
That's a great question. I think the commonality is the time-starved individual. A lot of us live quite high-powered, high-functional lives. And the greatest commodity we each have because of that is is the lack of time availability. So I think that's the big commonality across both spectra. You're right. There's one group of individuals who are the sort of high-performance athletes, IPL cricketers, Olympians, Paralympians, weekend warriors as well. And then there's another group of individuals who are sort of the corporate athlete or the entrepreneur, someone who's a high powered executive, homemaker, who's just trying to obtain and live life to the fullest as well. So time availability is the common constraint. I'm now seeing more people in their late 30s to early 40s. A lot of people in India are approaching that life stage. Awareness is there, access to international experts via social media, like the Peter Attias and the Andrew Hubermans and the Mark Hymans are there. What people have realized is that, how do I apply this to an Indian context, an Indian culture, an Indian palate, an Indian microbiome, an Indian biology? That's the space that we operate in here.
And what I love, Dr. Rani, is of course you have the science, you have the expertise, you have the medicalese to back you up, which is not always the case, I would say, with maybe the Insta accounts we tend to follow. These are buzzwords now, right? So in a way, it's cool. It's come into the mainstream. I do want to ask you, when people ask you for tips, and I was looking at some of the recent conferences and stuff like that, do you feel that you have to preface everything by saying this is evidence based? It's cutting edge science as well, but we need to look at this as evidence based, a system of science
No,
or medicine.
absolutely. I share that pet peeve with you. I get quite frustrated with the quotation of influencer on social media, because the credibility is number of followers, not in terms of expertise or body of work. Unfortunately, the other problem with that is that your individuals are completely overwhelmed. People coming to me often ask, "Doc, where do I start? How do I know? Should I be intermittent fasting or cold water showers? Should I be on a psychedelic mushroom, or should I be taking this particular type of supplement, etc.?" So I'm a big believer of n equals 1, which is that you are your own experiment. We need to be able to measure first, so that's why we always run a battery of investigations and diagnostics to begin with, biomarkers, which are blood based, genetic based, digital based, functional based, imaging based, etc. So there's a large body of information that is collected on the individual themselves. And then based on that individual, then the blueprint and the plan is created. What is it that you need to take in terms of supplementation? What is your nutritional macronutrients, calories that are required? What is the form of exercise and movement that your body truly requires, right? And then once you have that blueprint of action, then we get into the magic, which is actually execution and tracking, right? And that's why, as a company, one of the things that we've been very passionate about is building the tech to support this at scale. Because having a clinical practice where I do a remote consultation, that's great, that's really enjoyable and fun, but I want to be able to measure and monitor and progress and track progress over a long period of time. So we had to do it the hard way. We've built an app, we've built a clinical dashboard, we're now building an entire machine learning layer to support that scalability, so that we can do this not just for the hundreds and thousands that we do right now, but truly take it to millions and tens of millions over the next few years.
That's incredible. So that kind of scale, and that's global, clearly. Can I ask you a little bit more in terms of your own journey? Because I was watching an interview, where you had said that you'd taken a bit of a break or a sabbatical from work. And I know our paths had earlier crossed almost, or just about crossed when you were at Thrive. You're the GM for Thrive Global here in India. You took a bit of a break in the pandemic actually to start, going to help the BMC. Was it during COVID-19? Can you take us through a little bit about that journey and how that kind of spurred this interest as well?
So, service is very much built into my DNA. Obviously, ex services. My father was Indian Navy. My grandfather was also in the Royal Air Force. So, when our species faced its greatest challenge in our generation, doing an act of volunteering and service to the community just seemed like the most natural, intrinsic thing to do. It was not an easy decision to make because we didn't know much about the virus at the time. We still don't know that much about it, honestly. But I had two young kids in the family, at living at home. My wife's a clinician as well. So there were lots of things to balance. And there was the stigma associated with exposure, even in the medical profession itself. So I took some time. I became a volunteer for the BMC in Bombay, where I live. And I was deputed to G Ward, which was actually where Ground Zero was. It's where the first major outbreak of the virus began, which was in sort of the big slums around Worli, Dharavi area. And my job was, literally door by door, visiting in each slum, identifying individuals who were showing early stage symptoms, and then referring them on for the very limited amount of RT-PCR testing that was available back in 2020, in August, September of June, July, August, September of early of 2020, and then sending them to for treatment to the tier two centers that the city had set up. So that was my job. I think it'll always be probably the most impactful and purpose led work that my career has provided me with the opportunity to do and serve others. Unfortunately, however, I contracted the virus early on, and the original strain, and I fell very sick with it. And then I had to undergo my own journey of recovery and recuperation, which is where I started to discover these practices myself for myself. The importance of recovery and sleep, the importance of optimal micronutrients, what it means to improve your metabolic health through intermittent fasting, because I was on steroids, high dose steroids for so long, my metabolic health. I'd gained weight. All kinds of stuff was happening to my internal biochemistry. And so, in that journey of physical and psychological healing, I discovered a functional approach to living healthier, which I saw the impact for myself. And that's when that aha moment realized for me, which is that, I've built and created value for so many incredible people around the world previously. This is something that I want to do for myself and bring that impact to others. And that was the journey of how Human Edge started.
Thank you for sharing that. It really is inspiring, also, because you're talking about your own personal, merging with a more purpose-led mission now that has happened with Human Edge. I do want to ask you, in terms of, what are some of the myths, perhaps, about longevity? Can you take us through some of the misconceptions? Because, and a very basic question, of course, is when you say you're going to help people live longer and healthier, or just
Yeah.
make sure that the quality of life is what it should be at an older stage. Does everyone just presume you're talking about living till 100, or do you have to give an estimate of what is the average age? I mean, we do hear that, of course, people are going to live longer going forward, especially the next couple of decades. Take us
Yeah.
through some of the misconceptions and what you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I try not to put the cart before the horse. So I always like to phrase it as live healthier for longer, not the other way around. The main objective is to live healthier for longer. McKinsey published some data last year looking at global lifespan extension, i.e., the increase in life expectancy from 1960 till just before the pandemic. The pandemic dragged that number down slightly. And it was found globally the average increase in life expectancy was 19 years over those previous few decades. A lot of that has come down to countries like India and China rapidly improving infant mortality and maternal mortality ratios. Of course, that's helped buoyant that number. We're seeing a much better spread of availability in terms of medication for non-communicable diseases like anti-lipid medication, anti-diabetic medication, etc., and then advancements in surgical techniques as well. So these have sort of been the three big driving forces behind why we're now living for a greater number of years. But when you scratch beneath the surface, we actually find that there's some hidden powers at play which are very dangerous. The first major signal is that the average age of first chronic disease is happening at a younger age, and more people are suffering from multiple chronic diseases at the same time, right? So typically a disease like diabetes type 2 used to be mature onset. You'd have it in your 50s and 60s. I now have people in their late 20s and early 30s who are under our care with that particular disease. Same with low testosterone, same with micronutritional deficiency, same with cardiovascular disease, etc., etc. And we in India have a massive population. So it's a big denominator on the back of very high prevalence data. And that puts us in a very precarious position economically in terms of can we afford the care going forward over the next 2 decades? Short answer is no, we can't. We have to fix it in this decade. And we can't afford to do what the Western world has done, which is this big infrastructure project and have GDPs of 18, 20. Is no, we can't on healthcare. We just can't afford that. So preventative, proactive, participatory, personalized care has to be the model. Digital technology is the way to scale. And that's why this type of approach is just so fundamental in that, right? So when people ask me, how do I define longevity? I'm not a proponent of the don't die mission, which is that human beings should live forever. I like the idea that we have an expiry date. It's good that we allow the torch to be passed on to the next gen and the gen after, right? But that doesn't mean that we need to suffer in sickness and ill health for that period of time. So how can we build a life through practices on the foundations of good health, sleep, nutrition, movement, environment, emotional state, etc., which keeps us healthy well into our older years so that we can spend time with our grandkids, so that we can enjoy the pursuits of a long, healthy age and just live life to its fullest through that process.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, so do you find that people are more receptive to this kind of messaging now, say, opposed to, even a few years ago in India, in urban
Yeah,
India at least?
very much so. I mean, of course, from the time that we've connected first, banging the drum of good health way back in 20, when I moved to India in 2010, 11, right? And in those early years, trying to encourage people to live healthier. Then and the invest. I was an early stage investor in digital healthcare startups, and then of course ran Thrive Global. And for almost a decade, I was trying to preach this idea of preventive health. It's good for you. It's good for your employees. It's good for the organization. It's good for the country. The pandemic changed it. We all woke up to the realization that health is first. Everything else is meaningless without health. And
Yeah.
now we're entering a stage where technology and biology is intersecting. And at that point of intersection is where data and intelligence can be births and emerge. And that's sort of the movement and mission which we're taking charge and trying to grow.
And can I just ask you, because the same thing happened with mental health, right? With the pandemic, all of a sudden, mental health came into the mainstream in terms of our attention, and for the media as well.
Yeah.
I know you have said that this is all linked. Can you take us through a little bit of that? Because one of the tips you give people, it tends to also address stress, which has become a huge issue. Can you share a
Yeah.
bit?
So the first thing about stress is it's very important that we define it properly. Stress is not a bad thing, right? Biologically, we have two very distinct categories of stress. There's good physiological stress and there's poor physiological or chronic stress. It's the chronic stress in our lives today which lead to the metabolic disturbances, the chronic disease, and the mental health challenges that we face. The good physiological stress, like the athletes that I work with, is fundamental to performance. We all need that boost and shot of adrenaline in order to perform better and to be better at what we are doing in our day to day lives. So, firstly, I think it's important people appreciate the distinctions between the two. Now, chronic stress, whilst it manifests itself in terms of mental health, emotional health, and then some physical characteristics as well, it is interwoven with our day to day lives. And that's why at Human Edge, we talk about the 5 pillars of longevity or good health, always starting with sleep. Because sleep is the place where your body, brain, and heart allows itself to recover, recuperate, and grow. If you're not sleeping well, and all of the young parents out there will know this, or people who are taking red eye flights repeatedly, you wake up agitated and irritable, and you don't express gratitude, and you eat food which is high in fats, high in sugars, high in salts, and you gravitate towards caffeine and nicotine, etc. And you try and plaster the cracks with all other types of lifestyle excuses. So we always start with improving, measuring, tracking sleep. We then look at what you consume, because again, the food, the nutrition, the fuel that you put into this machine is what advances and allows you to propel yourself forward. If you put a bad meal full of carbohydrates and trans fats into your stomach, your calories and your energy levels are going to reflect that in the short, medium, and long term as well. So we look at the microbiome, we look at the macronutrients, we look at the distribution of what those macronutrients are and the amount of calories, and then we build a micronutrient supplementation stack based on the deficiencies and the health outcomes secondly. Then we look at movement. Our bodies are made to move aerobically and anaerobic, strength training, flexibility, and balance. All 5 components are critical for us being able to achieve all the things we want to do, whether it's climb a mountain or go on a skiing holiday with our kids or just play in the park with them. Right? There's all these things, but we need these 5 facets of movement in our lives. So, how do we measure that and how do we build for that? Particularly going back to your question around the 40-year-old man or woman as we enter the andropause, and that's something I just published today, which is the low testosterone level in men, and then the perimenopausal period for women, with changes in estrogen, progesterone, FSH, LH levels, and subclinical thyroidism as well, right? So that's a whole facet about endocrine health in there as well. Then the fourth pillar is the environment, because our biologies are now deeply connected and an extension of the biosphere around us, which includes technology, includes the physical environment, the air, the noise, the sound, the light, the water, the microplastics, the minerals, the heavy metals, all of these things. It affects us, the radiation, the digital gadgets that we have. And then our last pillar is our mental model of life. Are you content? Is your home a space of satisfaction? Do you have enough gratitude? Are you part of a community and a social fabric? Have you created purpose in your life? Do you express joy? All of these things, which are ultimately what makes us who we are as humans, that's our framework, and it's all interconnected with one another.
5 pillars. I love that. Let me ask you a little bit also about Dr. Ranney, your work. When you're working yourself with Olympians, cricketers. We've talked about high performance athletes in general. You
Yeah.
yourself, of course, and I do want to get into this, behind the scenes, as it were, because you yourself are a long distance runner. I saw this lovely post where you said it was a 10K fun run, which I will come to in a second. You've summited Everest. You have your own journey, of course, that you're going on. One, does that help you when you're working with high performance athletes, or is it a completely different ball game? And two, especially with the Olympics on right now, and hopefully as this podcast goes up, we do know that there's a huge amount of stress to be playing at that level. With the best of the best in the world. Can you talk a little bit about those rarefied heights that
Yeah.
athletes are looking at?
I just want to correct you. I've led the team to every space camp, and then we had a group that summited. I unfortunately was not one of the lucky ones to go all the way to the summit of Everest. I've summited Kilimanjaro, and in a few weeks' time, hopefully this time in 4 weeks, I'll be standing on top of a 21,000 foot peak here in India as I'm taking an
Wow.
expedition there as well. So look, I love the great outdoors. I've learned a lot of myself through those great experiences. And I think having been an individual who runs full marathons and does triathlons and climb crazy mountains, it brings a lot to the clinical practice, but it also allows me to resonate and empathize with these high performance athletes themselves, because I've put my body through some level of those types of training and can appreciate that through that perspective as well. I think, look, I wish all the Olympians luck from all the countries. It is really the greatest show on earth. Faster, stronger, fitter. It's just higher. It's just incredible to see every year, every 4 years, the human body continue to outdo what was achieved the last time around. And what is the true limits of what that means, irrespective of age, of gender, of background and experiences as well. I think it's fascinating to see the India journey. So when I moved to India, Delhi had was just hosting the Commonwealth Games, and there was a lot of focus on India at that time, really starting its sport journey beyond cricket. And over the course of the last 12 years now, we've now seen the number of medals that we get at Asian Games, at Commonwealth Games, and now at Olympic Games increase. I know there's a very strong bid in, hopefully, for us to hold the Olympics, fingers crossed, in 2036. That will be a great moment for the country. And I want to encourage everyone watching this, whether you're a supporter or an athlete, let's get behind them and let's ensure that we build more sports in India, of course, on the back of cricket, but make sure that we have other sports which are equally well invested in and, of course, supported as well. Yeah.
And that's such a good point because you're absolutely right. It's only in the recent past we're seeing that level of investment you need to be able to train people to this level that's required on a global stage. We've been hearing from athletes, I think, who revel in that now, right? That it's not just cricket anymore. But
Yeah.
can you talk to us a little bit about, so for example, even for you on some of these expeditions,
Yeah.
when you were working with astronauts, even for folks who are really pushing themselves beyond all limits at the Olympics, at other competitive sport, in whatever the arena is, what's going on mentally as well as physically? I mean, and how important is it that both of those things are worked on by coaches and others?
Yeah, the physical body allows you to build a foundation. And we often talk about this idea in high performance, which is you elevate the floor and then you raise the ceiling. And, if you're exposing and building your body, whether it's the skill of the discipline, whether it's generalized fitness, etc., you're generally allowing your physical body to reach that level of performance. But to really get to that gold medal, which is oftentimes the difference of 1/100th of a second in the 100-meter dash, for example, um, that requires a mental model and framework to be able to digest and be so comfortable with stress that stress is not seen as a negative but it's a positive. In fact, fear and excitement is often can be overlapped, and it's the same stimulus can lead to two very specific outcomes in terms of whether you're paralyzed in fear or whether you're propelled in excitement, right? And that mental model is something which these humans who are able to reach their human edge truly have understood and excel at from that perspective. So we often say that, yeah, the game is being played on the court or by the bodies, but actually the real competition is happening in the minds leading up to the match and during the match as well. And that's why even in the penultimate chapter, the final chapter of my book, At the Human Edge, whilst we took the reader through all of these incredible journeys of summiting Everest and going to the moon or Mars and surviving in the Sahara, etc., etc. I wanted to make sure that everyone reading it understood that it's that mind over matter and the magic that happens in the brain, which is ultimately what is oftentimes the difference between a gold, a bronze, or no medal at all.
And then for folks, in everyday life, because you also work with people, as you said, from all walks of life, when it
Yeah.
comes to managing, and thanks for that clarification on stress versus chronic stress being the challenge being chronic stress, what are some of the tips you would give people for chronic stress management or dealing with, let's say, toxic workplaces or other things that come up in where you do need strong mental conditioning, you do need a lot of peer support, you do need some sort of scaffolding to
Yeah.
get you through.
I think the first thing is the degree of resilience that is built into the individual. And resilience comes in across all five of those pillars that I was just describing to you. So let's assume that that's well taken care of, and an individual has that reserve capacity to manage the chronic stress which is pushed back at them. It's then about what are the levers or the tools at play that they have available to them to then navigate that particular environment or that particular conversation. And one of the most helpful ways of dealing with a chronic distressful state is actually to break the problem down into a series of smaller ones, and that immediately takes almost a chronic stress into a series of acute stressful situations which could potentially be overcome. Because one of the biggest challenges we found with chronic stress, or distress as we call it physiologically, is that there is no end game there is no termination. A good thing about an acute stress is that there is always a terminal response, right? If you think about this fight and flight response biologically driven by adrenaline, it's there to do one of three things: outrun the lion, outrun the deer, or find a mate competitively, right? But all of those results in an outcome. Either you get eaten by the lion or you survive, either your stomach is hungry or it's well fed, or you're able to pass on your genes or you're not, right? And that is very important to close the behavioral loop and complete either a sense of accomplishment or a sense of failure, but it finishes. There is a sense of finish with that. Chronic stress, however, is this thing that just sort of protracts and elongates forever and ever. And that's where people fall into this cycle of helplessness and hopelessness because they can't see the end. They don't know what's happening. And that's where cortisol begins to rise, inflammation starts to go up, and it starts to eat away at them mentally, physically, and emotional as well. So, one of the first things we try to do in that situation is, can we take that chronic problem and identify the small pieces that make up that puzzle, which could potentially be ticked off one by one, and then start to build some positive momentum around that?
Thank you. I just want you to run everything at this stage because you have all the answers. Anyone listening to this will know what I mean. But let me ask you just a few more questions on this, and then I want to ask you, some of the things that you yourself are maybe looking forward to, things that you're grateful for as we wind down. Just to kick off, though, this part of like explaining to us, what when people talk about biohacking.
Yeah.
What is that? What are you doing? Do we all need to know what that is, or is that like 5 steps later?
No, I think biohacking has become one of those sort of sexy online social media hashtags nowadays, and it can mean a lot of things to different people. So let me just define it from my perspective first. Why do I like the concept of the term? Is because we're all very used to technology having an operating system, and that operating system can be augmented to perform faster, better, stronger, right? And in the same way, we have an operating system, which is our physiology and our psychology, and that can also be augmented to perform faster, better, and stronger, right? So that's the underlying premise of what biohacking means. It's just sort of just hacking into the operating system and elevating it to do or function at a stronger, better, faster level, right? Now the spectrum of biohacking is actually pretty large. On one degree, you'll have social media influencers and maybe even clinicians who are talking about expensive therapies, whole body blood transfusion, stem cells, cryo infusions, living forever through these fancy techniques. I don't subscribe, and I'm not part of that movement in any way. I'm looking at the foundations of good health. What are the basic principles that we can each be doing in our day-to-day lives so that health is an everyday activity? It's not an episodic activity, which is when you break down. How do I help you, or you see the doctor when you're healthy so that you stay healthier for longer, right? That's the premise. So biohacks are, what am I drinking now? I'm drinking a protein supplement to ensure that I'm getting the required 1 gram per kilogram of protein that my body needs, right? For me, this is a biohack. 4 p.m., my protein supplement comes on my desk and I consume it. 400 milligrams of magnesium taken at 8 p.m. That helps you sleep deeper. That helps you sleep for longer. It improves your sleep quality. That for me is a biohack. Walking on wet grass with bare feet. That for me is a biohack because there's a psychological joy which is very hard to quantify, but we also know that there is a remission of negatively charged ions from the body. There's a grounding effect that brings. So for me, that is a biohack. Playing with my kids is in structured ways. So there are many biohacks which are not expensive, that don't require high technology, and that can actually be integrated into our day-to-day lives. What we're trying to do as a company is find the scientifically proven ones so that it's evidence based, align it to very specific biomarkers of deviation so that we know which one each individual should be doing rather than throw the entire kitchen sink at them. And then creating a structured method that we can collect data on improvement, going back to the n equals 1, to see whether this biohack is actually working for you, because it just might be that magnesium may not work for you and that you should actually be on L-theanine instead. But if I don't measure your sleep scores, either subjectively or objectively, I will never be able to tell you that. So that's sort of how we close the loop around this.
So safe to say you would not be a fan of people just listening to the Instagram videos or watching them and just taking whatever people are taking, right? Is that safe to
Absolutely.
say? We
I
should not be
think
doing
it's
that.
great for awareness building. And look, I create some of those videos myself, but I try and do it in as structured way as I can. But it's great for awareness building, but
Yeah.
it's not something which is should be done by everyone. You need to ensure and try and understand which of those things should I be doing right now and how do I measure it for how long for.
Okay, that's fair enough. So let me ask you a little bit, Dr. Rani, about you behind the scenes. What are some of the things you are excited about right now? I can't believe it's already August 2024. Firstly, I don't know where this year has gone, but one is this expedition you're talking about. That sounds very cool. You've obviously been training for that, right?
Yeah.
I'm presuming for a while. Okay. What are some of the things you're excited about, personally and professionally?
Yeah, so my wife and I, we try to do one big expedition every year, and it sort of started through the pandemic as part of my process of recovery. She's a sports physiotherapist, so she was actually critical to me regaining my muscle strength in my lower limbs, which I'd lost through the virus effects. So we used to go on these short walks around Bombay in when it was very quiet, and so we created this idea for ourselves of Googo Gum, which is GU get up, GO get out, and GM get moving. And so since then, every year we've been doing one expedition together. Kilimanjaro was one, the marathon in Ladakh was another, the Arctic Circle was there last year. And this year we're very fortunate because a whole group of our friends are actually joining us as well. And we're hoping to summit the highest trekkable peak in India, which is at around 6,500 meters or 21,500 feet, which is in Ladakh. And we're leaving in about 3 to 4 weeks' time for that. So we've all been training together for that. So that's definitely something that I'm very excited about. I've also registered for my first full ultra marathon. So that's a 50-kilometer marathon in the desert of Rajasthan, which will be starting at noon. So it's a management of heat and long distance. So I'm very excited for that. That's going to be at the end of the year. And then I've got, as you probably know, I've got 2 young kids, and we're very active as a family. So we're looking forward to more family treks and trails and outdoor adventures together, and that's what really keeps us excited and entertained. Yeah.
That's awesome. So they love it as well, the kids.
Yeah. We've been lucky to either indoctrinate them or maybe role model for them, but they're both real troopers. And we were we were trekking in Goa, Karnataka a few weeks ago in the monsoons, and we were covered in leeches. And then we made a game: whoever collects the most leeches on the body wins. So they've
Oh,
really taken to the outdoors as
I
well
love
as we
it.
do. Yeah, yeah.
That's fantastic. And it's so cool to hear. I mean, as a family, that's also such a great bonding experience, apart from all the health stuff. I think I
Yeah.
do want to ask you a little bit. I've been talking to some people about the importance of leadership, like human centric leadership, in this sort of age of ascendant AI. I'd love to know your thoughts when you work with leaders, the kind of leader you aspire to be. Does empathy have a role to play, and what do you think in terms of this ascendant AI as well? This sort of era we're entering.
Yeah, it's a massive role. The I look back at the TEDx talk I gave 6, 7 years ago, and the central narrative there was designed for trust. I was talking about this 2030 vision of digital intelligence being able to be your doctor on your mobile device. And it's strange to see now that I'm actually part of a company building it. It's life is always very nicely lived, connecting the dots backwards. So I think for us in healthcare, in AI, trust and empathy are two of the big words that we need to design around, because it's just such a personal affair. It's not the same as transacting to buy a product online. It's not the same as booking a ticket or trying to order your groceries. There is an element of trust, data privacy, security, all of those things, and ultimately empathy that we need to design for. And it's very cognizant in our work, through all the work that we're trying to do, looking at large language models, looking at different agents for these applications, to the work that we're doing around machine learning, etc. So I think that's a big thread for us. And I think some of the most successful companies now going forward will be those that use technology but don't forget that we're humans. And that means the empathy, that means the compassion, that means the joy of what it really means to be a human being. And I think those are qualities which we need to double down and double click on. Yeah.
And the ethics as well, right? Of a lot of what's happening in terms of data collection and stuff. I do want to ask you as an aside, though, what are your thoughts on what is this augmented humans? Folks like Ray Kurzweil saying we eventually want to upload our memories into the cloud, and that there is this. Well, I suppose there are a lot of debates on what makes humans unique, right? And there are people who think that there's not all that much. You see the tech, you see that this is coming. How do you feel about what's around
So
the corner?
I did try to convince myself a few months ago that we are living in a simulation. And, I went down that rabbit hole, in many ways, I think propagated by what Elon's been saying recently as
Yeah.
well. And I was not able to, as a human optimist, convince myself that that was the case. Now, either it's just the degree of denial that I'm putting a lens around my brain, or it's the reality of it at all. And do I really want to envisage a future like that? Personally, I don't actually. I like the idea of human experiences. I like the idea. Whilst I am, I think, like all humans, and maybe we're getting a little philosophical here, I am scared of mortality. And in some ways, I look at this whole journey of longevity, maybe catalyzed because of my own near. I don't want to go into that space, but because of the frailty that I had experienced through my own illness, and maybe for me longevity is a way of trying to outrun my mortality, right? But I also think that at the same time, death is equally an important part of life, not just for the individual but for the people around that individual as well. So I'm not actually a big fan of this movement of uploading memories into the cloud. Let's make our impact whilst we're alive. Let's do something which is meaningful to leave legacy, and let's ensure that the planet is left in a better state than what we found it in. That, I think, is actually the big missing piece in all of this right now. And it's
Yeah.
something that I'm trying to throw my weight behind in terms of the climate crisis more and more.
Yeah.
But that's how I want to live my life, and how I hope that whenever I reach the end of days, that I would have met those key criteria for myself.
Oh, that's very thoughtful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Just a couple more questions for you. Not as heavy, I don't think. One of them is in terms of pop culture. What are your influences? Anything you love? Anything you watch, read, listen to that you'll share?
So I've got an 8-year-old boy and a near 6-year-old girl. So I've become a Swifty by proxy, and thanks to my boy, I'm learning about fishing and hiking and making a fire and baking and all this type of stuff, and cricket and sport. So pop culture in the Ranney household is very much dictated by the two children who have control of the remote and the playlist when we're on our long drives. So that's pretty much it. I love reading. I'm very fortunate because people send me their books when they've written it, and I always love reading it. And I'm quite a voracious reader, so I'm constantly going through non-fiction books on science, philosophy, history, technology, future, etc. So I love to consume that. And also, I'm a big fan of podcasts because I just spend so much time running or cycling every week. I found podcasts to be a great way of learning and continuously educating and being inspired and entertained at the same time, which is why I'm always happy to say yes to an invitation as well, to
I
help
love it.
share that with other people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating medium. Okay, great. So say again is going to be on your podcast list. I know it. I know it. After your episode goes up. Final question for you, Dr. Rani. This is a friend and former colleague had suggested that we wind down interviews. So another shout out to Sai, asking what are people grateful for? What are one or two things that you're grateful for today?
Every day I try to remind myself that, and there are days that I forget, but on those days I remind myself of the physical pain that I went through, and how I'm just so grateful that I'm running again, and I'm walking again, and I'm getting to do and build and spend time with my family and see the kids grow up. I don't care about the fancy stuff. I don't care about the material stuff. I care about the good, wholesome stuff. And I'm just very fortunate to have a wife and children that allow me to enjoy those things with them.
Oh, that's beautiful. So we did get deep again. Thank you so much. I appreciate your sharing that and sharing some of your journey with us. And wishing you all the best as you go forward. We'll be keeping an eye on your expedition, your journey with Human Edge, and hopefully you'll inspire many more people. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.